In the quiet, picturesque town of Pine Hill, the gruesome murder of Jennifer Johnson sent shockwaves through the community. What appeared to be a peaceful, close-knit suburban enclave was shattered by a crime of passion and betrayal that revealed the dark underbelly of seemingly idyllic lives. The lives of two couples, Daniel and Linda Garner, and Mark and Jennifer Johnson, intertwined in ways that would lead to obsession, deceit, and ultimately, murder. Daniel Garner was a respected architect, known for his charming demeanor and seemingly perfect marriage to Linda, a dedicated schoolteacher. Mark Johnson, a successful financial advisor, and his wife Jennifer were the Garners' closest friends. The two couples shared more than just neighborhood barbecues and weekend getaways. They also engaged in a consensual wife-swapping arrangement that initially brought excitement and novelty to their lives. However, beneath the surface of this unconventional lifestyle, dangerous emotions were brewing. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer grew into an all-consuming obsession, one that Linda, his wife, was painfully aware of. Jennifer, sensing the intensity of Daniel's feelings, decided to put an end to the arrangement, not realizing the deadly consequences her decision would provoke. Daniel and Linda Garner had been married for 10 years, and from the outside, their marriage appeared to be a model of stability and happiness. Daniel was a successful architect, known for his innovative designs and charismatic personality. Linda, a third-grade teacher, was beloved by her students and respected by her colleagues. They lived in a charming house on Maple Street, surrounded by a well-tended garden that Linda took great pride in. Mark and Jennifer Johnson moved to Pine Hill 5 years ago and quickly became friends with the Garners. Mark, a financial advisor, was outgoing and affable, always the life of the party. Jennifer, with her striking beauty and magnetic personality, was equally popular. The Johnsons' arrival brought a new dynamic to the neighborhood, and their friendship with the Garners blossomed over shared interests and mutual respect. The idea of wife-swapping was first brought up during a dinner party at the Garners' home. Fueled by wine and a sense of adventure, the conversation turned to the topic of open relationships. To everyone's surprise, the concept was met with curiosity rather than shock. Over the next few weeks, the idea was discussed more seriously, with all parties agreeing to boundaries and rules to ensure their primary relationships remained intact. The first encounter was awkward but exciting. Daniel and Jennifer, and Mark and Linda exchanged partners for the night. It was a thrilling yet nerve-wracking experience, but one that left them eager for more. What started as a once-in-a-while experiment soon became a regular part of their lives, adding a spark to both marriages. Initially, the arrangement seemed to work well. Both couples appeared happier and more connected. They maintained their social activities, often hosting joint parties and going on vacations together. Their secret was carefully guarded, discussed only within the confines of their homes or during private gatherings. The novelty of the arrangement brought a sense of exhilaration, and for a while, it seemed like they had found the perfect balance. However, as the months passed, subtle changes began to surface, particularly in Daniel's behavior. He started to show an unusual amount of interest in Jennifer, often finding reasons to spend time alone with her. Linda noticed his increasing preoccupation, but chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. Mark, too, seemed oblivious to the growing tension. Unbeknownst to the others, Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was turning into something deeper and more troubling. He found himself thinking about her constantly, replaying their encounters in his mind and craving more time with her. What had started as a harmless adventure was slowly morphing into an obsession that would have devastating consequences for all involved. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was no longer just a thrill. It had evolved into an all-consuming obsession. He thought about her incessantly, his mind wandering to their encounters during work meetings and family dinners. His architectural projects, once his passion, now seemed secondary to his desire for Jennifer. He started to find ways to be near her, volunteering to help with tasks Mark usually handled, or inviting the Johnsons over more frequently. Linda began to notice the change in her husband. At first, she attributed it to the excitement of their new lifestyle, but soon it became clear that Daniel's interest in Jennifer went beyond their agreement. He became irritable and distant when they weren't with the Johnsons, and his conversations often veered towards Jennifer's likes and dislikes, her quirks and habits. One evening, while cleaning up after a dinner party, Linda confronted Daniel. His reaction was defensive, dismissing her concerns as jealousy. Linda, not wanting to disrupt the delicate balance they had established, let it go but kept a closer eye on him. Her suspicions grew when she found him staring at Jennifer during gatherings, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. Jennifer, too, began to sense Daniel's growing obsession. Initially flattered by his attention, she soon found it uncomfortable. His touches became more possessive, his words more intimate than appropriate. She discussed her discomfort with Mark, who brushed it off, believing Daniel was just more expressive in his affections. Mark's nonchalance left Jennifer feeling isolated in her concerns. The turning point came during a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin. The couples had planned the getaway to reconnect and enjoy some time away from their routine. However, the trip only served to highlight Daniel's fixation. He monopolized Jennifer's time, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone, leaving Mark and Linda behind. The tension was palpable, and Jennifer's attempts to distance herself were met with subtle resistance from Daniel. One night, while sitting by the fire, Daniel made a comment that crossed the line. He spoke about leaving everything behind and starting fresh, just the two of them. Jennifer, shocked and unsettled, excused herself and went to bed early. Linda, who had overheard the conversation, confronted Daniel again. This time he was less dismissive, but still refused to acknowledge the depth of his feelings. Linda's frustration grew as she realized the extent of Daniel's obsession. She loved her husband, but was increasingly aware that his infatuation with Jennifer could destroy their marriage and their friendship with the Johnsons. Despite her efforts to intervene, Daniel's behavior only became more erratic. He started to follow Jennifer outside of their arranged meetings, showing up at her yoga classes, and even appearing at her workplace under the guise of casual visits. Jennifer's unease turned to fear. She confided in a close friend, who advised her to distance herself from Daniel as much as possible. Determined to take control, Jennifer decided to end the arrangement altogether. She hoped that by doing so, Daniel would return to his senses, and they could all move on from this chapter without causing further harm. One evening, while Mark was away on a business trip, Daniel showed up at the Johnsons' house unannounced. Jennifer was taken aback but let him in, hoping to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Daniel confessed his feelings for her, speaking of a future where they could be together openly. Jennifer, horrified, tried to reason with him, explaining that their arrangement was never meant to be more than a temporary excitement. As Daniel's declarations became more intense, Jennifer's fear turned to anger. She realized she needed to put an end to this before it destroyed her marriage and her friendship with Linda. She told Daniel firmly that their arrangement was over and that he needed to respect her boundaries and her marriage. Daniel, visibly shaken, tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Jennifer stood her ground. Over the next few days, Jennifer avoided Daniel, hoping he would come to his senses. She confided in Linda, who listened with a heavy heart. Linda knew her husband's obsession had gone too far, and while she wanted to support Jennifer, she also felt a twisted loyalty to Daniel. She promised Jennifer she would talk to him, hoping to defuse the situation. However, Daniel's obsession only deepened. He started showing up at Jennifer's work, waiting for her after hours, and leaving her messages expressing his undying love. Jennifer, feeling increasingly unsafe, decided to confront him one last time, hoping to make him understand the gravity of his actions. They met at a secluded park away from prying eyes. Jennifer reiterated that their arrangement was over and that his behavior was unacceptable. She pleaded with him to let go and move on. Daniel, unable to accept her rejection, grew desperate. He accused her of leading him on and playing with his emotions. Jennifer, maintaining her composure, insisted that they part ways and return to their respective marriages. Unbeknownst to them, Linda had followed Daniel to the park. She watched from a distance, her heart pounding as she saw the confrontation unfold. She could see the anguish on Daniel's face and the determination on Jennifer's. Linda knew that this confrontation was inevitable, but she also feared what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Daniel's desperation turned to anger. Jennifer's refusal to entertain his fantasies felt like a personal betrayal. He lashed out verbally, calling her names and accusing her of ruining his life. Jennifer, holding back tears, stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Linda, watching from the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to intervene before things got out of hand. She stepped out of her hiding place and approached the two, her voice shaking as she called out to Daniel. The sight of Linda seemed to snap Daniel out of his rage. and he turned to her, his expression a mix of confusion and relief. Jennifer, taking advantage of the distraction, walked away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Daniel as possible. Linda, now alone with her husband, tried to calm him down. She reassured him that they would find a way to move past this, but inside she knew that their lives had been irreversibly changed. The affair had reached its breaking point, and Jennifer's decision to end the arrangement had set off a chain of events that could not be undone. As the dust settled, the true extent of Daniel's obsession and the depths of Linda's complicity would soon come to light, leading to a tragic and violent conclusion. The confrontation at the park had left Daniel in a state of turmoil. Jennifer's firm rejection and Linda's unexpected appearance had shaken him to his core. He returned home that night, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and despair. Linda, sensing the storm brewing within him, tried to soothe his troubled thoughts, but Daniel remained inconsolable. Over the next few days, Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic. He vacillated between bouts of intense anger and deep despondency. He stopped going to work, spending his days obsessing over Jennifer's rejection and the perceived injustices he had suffered. Linda, unable to reach him, felt her own frustration and fear growing. She knew something had to give, but she wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of events that would soon unfold. Jennifer, on the other hand, was determined to move forward. She avoided all contact with Daniel, focusing on her work and her relationship with Mark. She hadn't told her husband the full extent of Daniel's obsession, fearing his reaction and the potential fallout. She hoped that by cutting ties, Daniel would eventually come to terms with the end of their arrangement and leave her alone. One evening, Jennifer returned home from work to find Daniel waiting for her outside her house. Her heart sank at the sight of him, and she steeled herself for another confrontation. She approached him cautiously, her voice steady but firm as she told him to leave. Daniel, his eyes wild with desperation, begged her for one last chance to explain himself. Jennifer, sensing the futility of the conversation, tried to walk past him, but Daniel grabbed her arm. His grip was tight and painful, and Jennifer could see the madness in his eyes. She struggled to break free, her voice rising as she demanded he let go. The noise attracted the attention of a neighbor, who stepped outside to see what was happening. Seeing the neighbor, Daniel released Jennifer and fled. Jennifer, shaken and frightened, thanked the neighbor and hurried inside. She called Linda, hoping to find some way to resolve the situation without involving the police. Linda, hearing the fear in Jennifer's voice, agreed to meet with her the next day to discuss how to handle Daniel's increasingly unstable behavior. The next day, Linda met Jennifer at a local cafe. Jennifer, looking exhausted and tense, explained the encounter with Daniel and her growing fear for her safety. Linda listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. She promised Jennifer that she would talk to Daniel and make him understand that their relationship was over. After the meeting, Linda returned home to find Daniel in a state of agitation. She confronted him about the incident with Jennifer, her voice a mix of anger and concern. Daniel, feeling cornered, lashed out at her, accusing her of taking Jennifer's side and betraying him. The argument escalated, and Linda, fearing for her own safety, retreated to their bedroom. That night, Daniel's thoughts turned darker. He couldn't accept that Jennifer had rejected him and that his own wife was against him. In his twisted mind, he believed that the only way to resolve the situation was to eliminate the source of his pain. He decided that if he couldn't have Jennifer, no one could. On a cold, clear night, Daniel made his way to the Johnsons' house. He knew Mark was out of town, leaving Jennifer alone. He broke in through a side window and made his way to the bedroom where Jennifer lay sleeping. The sight of her, peaceful and unaware, fueled his rage and desperation. He grabbed a kitchen knife and approached her, his mind filled with a chaotic mix of love and hatred. Jennifer awoke to the sight of Daniel standing over her, the knife gleaming in the dim light. She tried to scream, but Daniel covered her mouth, his grip strong and unyielding. In a fit of rage, he plunged the knife into her chest, silencing her cries. As Jennifer's life slipped away, Daniel stood over her, his mind a haze of conflicting emotions. In the aftermath of the murder, Daniel fled the scene, his hands stained with Jennifer's blood. He returned home, where Linda found him trembling and incoherent. She realized immediately what he had done, and in a moment of twisted loyalty, she decided to help him cover up the crime. The life they had built, the secrets they had kept, were all at stake. Linda knew that if they were to survive, they needed to act quickly and decisively. Linda, driven by a twisted sense of loyalty and self-preservation, quickly took control of the situation. She led Daniel to the bathroom, instructing him to remove his clothes and wash off the blood. Her mind raced with the urgency of their predicament. She knew they had to act fast to cover up the crime and protect their secret life. As Daniel stood under the hot shower, the water turning pink around his feet, Linda gathered his clothes and placed them in a plastic bag. She scrubbed the floor where he had walked, making sure to eliminate any trace of blood. Once Daniel was cleaned up, she sat him down and forced him to recount every detail of what had happened. Despite his emotional state, Daniel managed to provide a coherent account, his voice shaking with the weight of his actions. Linda devised a plan. They needed to create an alibi and dispose of any evidence linking them to the crime. She called a trusted friend, claiming that Daniel had been with her all evening, ensuring their alibi was backed up. Then, she drove to a secluded area outside of town, where she burned Daniel's blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon, praying that the fire would consume any remaining evidence. The police questioned everyone in the neighborhood, including the Garners. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel, although visibly distressed, managed to avoid raising suspicion. The investigation seemed to stall, with no concrete leads pointing to the Garners. Despite their initial success in evading the authorities, the psychological toll of the murder weighed heavily on both Daniel and Linda. Daniel became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He withdrew from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Linda, while outwardly composed, felt the strain of their secret pressing down on her. She became hyper-vigilant, scrutinizing every interaction and behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. The weeks following Jennifer's murder were a blur of tension and deception for the Garners. Linda took on the role of the stabilizer, managing Daniel's paranoia while ensuring their public facade remained intact. She monitored the news for any updates on the investigation, relieved that the police seemed to have no solid leads. However, Linda knew that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed to create a narrative that would divert attention away from Daniel. She suggested to Daniel that he should appear more distraught over Jennifer's death, to align with the community's grief and to throw off any suspicion. At social gatherings and community meetings, Daniel played the part of the grieving friend. He spoke of Jennifer with a mix of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Mark, devastated and desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Daniel's empathy, never suspecting his friend's involvement in his wife's death. Daniel's mental state deteriorated further, his guilt manifesting in nightmares and hallucinations. He started drinking heavily, seeking solace in alcohol but finding only temporary escape. Linda, fearing he might confess in a drunken stupor, kept a close eye on him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house. One evening, as Daniel sat slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down. He confessed to Linda that he couldn't live with the guilt any longer, that he needed to come clean. Linda, panicked, tried to calm him down. To help maintain their composure, Linda suggested they take a short trip out of town. They traveled to a secluded cabin in the mountains, hoping the change of scenery would help Daniel regain some semblance of peace. The isolation provided a temporary respite, allowing them to plan their next steps without the constant pressure of the investigation looming over them. During their time at the cabin, Linda reinforced the importance of their secrecy. She coached Daniel on how to handle police questioning and public interactions, drilling him until he could respond without hesitation. Linda's determination to protect their lifestyle and avoid imprisonment fueled her relentless drive to keep their story straight. Upon returning to Pine Hill, the Garners resumed their lives with a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel, though still haunted by his actions, managed to present a more stable front. Linda continued to manage their interactions with the community, ensuring they remained above suspicion. However, the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Daniel's increased drinking and erratic behavior, and whispers of his possible involvement in Jennifer's death began to circulate. Linda, ever vigilant, worked to quash the rumors, but she knew their time was running out. As the police investigation continued, new evidence came to light, pointing towards inconsistencies in Daniel's alibi. The Garners' carefully constructed world was on the brink of collapse, and the truth was closer to being revealed than ever before. Detective Mitchell interviewed the Garners separately, noting any discrepancies in their stories. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel's emotional state seemed consistent with that of a grieving friend. However, Mitchell's instincts told her there was more to the story. As the weeks passed, new evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of Jennifer's phone records revealed a series of increasingly desperate text messages from Daniel, indicating his obsession with her. Mitchell brought Daniel in for further questioning, pressing him on the inconsistencies in his alibi and the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. Daniel, struggling to maintain his composure, stuck to the story Linda had coached him on, but his nervousness and evasive answers only heightened the detective's suspicions. The turning point came when a neighbor came forward with crucial information. They had seen Daniel's car parked near the Johnsons' house on the night of the murder and remembered the strange behavior he had exhibited. This testimony, combined with the forensic evidence and Daniel's erratic behavior, was enough for the police to obtain a search warrant for the Garners' home. During the search, the police found remnants of the burned clothing and traces of blood that had seeped into the floorboards, despite Linda's thorough cleaning. This damning evidence, coupled with the witness testimony and phone records, painted a clear picture of Daniel's guilt. The net was closing in on the Garners, and Linda realized that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. She knew that their only chance of escaping a lengthy prison sentence was to come up with a new plan, one that would shift the blame away from them and onto someone else. As the police closed in, Linda and Daniel faced the harsh reality of their situation. The lies and deceit that had once protected them were now threatening to unravel completely, and the truth was about to be revealed in a way they could never have anticipated. As the evidence against Daniel mounted, Detective Mitchell prepared to make her move. She brought Daniel in for another round of questioning, this time with a different approach. She laid out all the evidence they had gathered, the phone records, the witness testimonies, and the forensic findings. Daniel, cornered and overwhelmed, began to crack under the pressure. Mitchell pressed harder, suggesting that if Daniel came clean, he might receive a more lenient sentence. Daniel, unable to handle the weight of his guilt and the relentless questioning, finally broke down. He confessed to killing Jennifer, describing his obsession, the confrontation, and the moment he lost control. However, in his confession, Daniel also implicated Linda, revealing her role in covering up the crime. He described how she had helped him clean up, dispose of evidence, and craft an alibi. Mitchell, sensing the opportunity to get the full story, had Linda brought in for questioning as well. Confronted with Daniel's confession, Linda initially denied any involvement, but as Mitchell detailed the evidence and Daniel's account, Linda realized there was no way out. Her carefully constructed lies had finally unraveled. She admitted to helping Daniel, explaining that she had done it out of a misguided sense of loyalty and fear of losing everything they had built. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner captivated Pine Hill and the surrounding region. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, eager to see the conclusion of the tragic tale. Daniel, charged with first-degree murder, and Linda, charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice, both pled guilty to their respective charges. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda, despite her role in the cover-up, received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and her previously clean record. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10. Mark Johnson, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, found some solace in the justice served, but continued to mourn the loss of his beloved wife.